I used to believe I had a solid handle on my life with Sophie. After all, we'd been together for years. Enough time to settle into routines, share inside jokes, and remember each other's coffee preferences, not to mention where we kept the spare key. While it wasn't exactly exhilarating, it was comfortable. Sure, we might have been in a bit of a rut, but isn't that just part of being with someone long-term? That's what I kept telling myself. Anyway, then, seemingly out of nowhere, she started behaving differently. I know it sounds cliché, but honestly, it felt like one morning I woke up next to a stranger. She began spending more time with her cousin Ryan, insisting it was all for work. At first, I didn't think much of it. I figured, well, they're family. If she needs to help him out, so be it. But the way she kept bringing him up made me uneasy. It felt like she was trying too hard to justify their time together. "It's work," she'd repeat, almost as if she sensed my doubts. I hadn't questioned it, at least not initially. That's when things started to get strange. Sophie seemed more distant, as if a wall had gone up between us that I couldn't break through. She began going out more often, claiming she had errands or appointments, while I stayed home, feeling that nagging sense in my gut that something wasn't right. She'd brush me off with a curt tone that was new to me, all sharpness where there used to be warmth. And believe me, the shift in our intimacy didn't escape my notice. She'd turn away, insist she was tired, or conjure up some excuse. It was as if her rejection was real, the kind that leaves bruises you can't quite explain. But it wasn't just Sophie. I began picking up on strange vibes from her friend, Nina. They had been thick as thieves since college. Typically, Nina was friendly, always stopping for a chat whenever I saw her. But now, she was avoiding me, dodging eye contact like I was contagious. If I even attempted to speak with her, she'd find a way to excuse herself. It felt as if she was hiding something I wasn't meant to discover. One evening, we had dinner with Ryan and his girlfriend, Chloe. Right away, I could tell Chloe wasn't the type to speak up for herself. She was quiet, perhaps too young and timid for Ryan, in my opinion. But here's the kicker. During dinner, I caught a strange exchange between Sophie and Ryan. It was subtle, but it lingered just a moment too long, enough to make me feel like I'd walked in on a conversation that wasn't meant for my ears. Chloe picked up on it too, although she didn't say a word. Her eyes would drop each time Ryan looked at Sophie, as if she were trying to ignore the unspoken tension in the air. I kept trying to brush it off, convincing myself that I was overanalyzing things, that maybe it was all just a coincidence. But doubts crept in like a slow poison, refusing to let me rest. Eventually, I spoke with a coworker named David, who'd been through a brutal divorce after his wife cheated. David wasn't the type to say, "I told you so," but he didn't sugarcoat anything either. He listened to me and advised me to keep my eyes open, warning that accusations without proof would only complicate matters. He explained how these situations often start small, just a few odd glances or seemingly innocent visits. By the time you realize what's happening, he said, it's usually too late. His words lodged in my mind, maybe a little too deeply. Days turned into a blur, each one more disheartening than the last. Sophie's behavior only fueled my suspicions. She had late nights, and her phone would light up with texts she'd dismiss with a quick flick of her wrist. I felt like I was losing my mind, watching my wife drift further away while she enveloped herself in secrets I wasn't allowed to touch. No matter how hard I tried to suppress it, that persistent feeling returned, insisting this wasn't just a phase or a rough week. The worst part? I began second-guessing everything. Each time she left the house or mentioned Ryan, doubts crept in. I found myself watching her, half hoping to catch a glimpse of guilt or shame in her eyes, something that might confirm the fears I couldn't bear to voice. Yet every time I looked, all I saw was her slipping further away, wrapped in layers of indifference that felt a lot like contempt. It gnawed at me, like a worm burrowing into my brain, twisting and chewing, leaving me restless and furious, questioning if my own wife was lying to me day after day. I began keeping mental notes of the smallest details, her routines, her tone of voice, how she reacted whenever I mentioned Ryan. My thoughts spiraled into chaos, caught between paranoia and denial, desperately hoping I was mistaken. But that persistent feeling wouldn't fade. Deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. The more I tried to ignore it, the worse it became. It was like watching a slow-motion train wreck, and I was powerless to look away. Sophie wasn't just distant anymore. She was secretive. She started carrying her phone with her everywhere, even if it was just to grab a glass of water. If I so much as tried to peek at the screen, she'd angle it away, guarding it like it held the secrets of the universe. One night, she took her phone into the bathroom with her, and she was in there for what felt like an eternity. I could hear muffled whispers through the door. Her voice was soft but urgent, the same tone she used when we were first together. I don't know how long I sat outside, waiting for her to emerge. When she finally did, her expression was startled, as if she hadn't expected to find me there. "Just checking emails," she said too quickly. I forced a nod, but the pit in my stomach screamed it wasn't emails she was checking. From there, things kept spiraling. She'd glance at the clock more often, as if she was anticipating something or someone. I'd try to engage her about her day, make small talk, but her responses were clipped, as though she was irritated that I even cared to ask. "Work stuff," she'd say with an exasperated sigh, making it clear my curiosity was a burden. I wanted to trust her, but each excuse felt flimsier than the last, and I was starting to feel like a fool for even trying to believe it. Then there was Ben, our neighbor and family friend. Over the years, we had shared countless beers, exchanged lawn care advice, and enjoyed the typical neighborly banter. So, when I bumped into him one evening, I was unprepared for the bombshell he was about to drop. I didn't want to say anything, but he began, glancing around as if he wished he could retract his words. "I saw Sophie at a cafe across town. She was there with that cousin of hers, Ryan, right?" I forced a laugh, trying to keep my tone light. "Yeah. They're working on some project together." Ben shifted uncomfortably, his gaze dropping to his shoes. "I mean, they just seemed really close. Way too close for cousins, if you ask me." He rubbed his neck, his expression twisted in an awkward mix of concern and guilt, and it was clear he regretted saying anything. But it was too late for that now. My mind began to spin, and I couldn't help but push him for more details. "Did they, look intimate?" Ben shrugged, clearly wishing he were anywhere else but there. "Look, man, I don't want to jump to conclusions. I just thought you should know." With that, he quickly made an excuse and hurried off, leaving me standing there, feeling as if I'd just been punched in the gut. As if that wasn't enough, the late-night phone calls began. I'd be lying next to her, just starting to drift off, when her phone would buzz loudly. She'd bolt upright, grab the phone, and rush out of bed, mumbling about work. This pattern continued night after night, and each time I asked about it, she dismissed my concerns. "It's just work stuff, Thomas. Go back to sleep." One night, I caught a glimpse of her screen and saw a message filled with heart emojis. The moment she noticed my gaze, she quickly turned the screen away, muttering something about a colleague's wife who was having a tough time. I wanted to believe her, but by then, trust felt like a luxury I could no longer afford. The air between us grew thick with tension, but I couldn't just brush it aside. Not yet. I needed to uncover the truth. That's when I remembered Chloe, Ryan's girlfriend. She had always seemed uncomfortable during our dinners, often remaining quiet. Maybe she felt the same unease I did. After a few attempts at casual run-ins, I finally managed to strike up a conversation with her one evening. We stood outside, the tension palpable. Chloe looked hesitant, her eyes darting around as if she feared someone might overhear our conversation. "I don't know, Thomas," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't think he's doing anything wrong, but Ryan has been distant too. He spends a lot of time with Sophie. I mean, I understand they're working together, but..." Her voice trailed off, and she stared down at her hands. She didn't need to say more. The way she bit her lip revealed everything. I could sense her fear of losing him, even if she didn't fully understand why. I thanked her and gave her an awkward pat on the shoulder as I walked away, feeling more confused and hurt than ever. Part of me longed for her to confirm my worst fears, while another part desperately wanted her to reassure me that I was overreacting, that it was all in my head. Instead, I was left with a sickening feeling, as though I was spiraling deeper into a pit with no escape. By this point, I was barely managing to sleep. Every time her phone buzzed or she stepped out of the room, my mind raced. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to trace back to when everything had started to go so wrong. How had we reached this point, with me doubting her fidelity while she treated me like an unwanted stranger in my own home? I was losing myself in this chaos, and I knew that if I didn't uncover the truth soon, it would drive me to the brink. But I couldn't shake the image of her, huddled over her phone, smiling at messages she'd never share with me. I couldn't ignore Ben's words, the pity that lingered in his eyes as he looked at me, and Chloe, who seemed to be barely hanging on herself, a silent witness to whatever was happening between Sophie and Ryan. I was done waiting for Sophie to slip up or for some miracle to hand me the truth. The late-night calls, the guarded phone, the flimsy excuses. It all added up to something ugly, and I needed solid proof. I couldn't continue living with the gnawing uncertainty that plagued me, the vivid images of her and Ryan playing on repeat in my mind. So, I decided it was time to take matters into my own hands. My first step was to figure out what was really going on when I wasn't around. It felt drastic, but I was beyond caring. I set up cameras, one in our bedroom, another in the garage, and the last at her workplace, where she was supposedly helping Ryan with documents. I kept this plan to myself. I didn't want anyone to know how far I was willing to go until I had undeniable proof. Shortly after getting everything in place, I confided in my oldest friend, James, about my actions. James and I had grown up on the same block, sharing countless adventures and mischief. If anyone would understand my desperation, it was him. I still recall his reaction, a mix of shock, concern, and a hint of anger on my behalf. He knew this wasn't typical behavior for me. "I don't know, man," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "I get it, but you're playing with fire here." Despite his initial hesitation, he offered to help. He didn't pry too much or judge me for what I felt I had to do. Instead, he sat down with me, going over the footage we collected, one agonizing day at a time. For weeks, nothing happened. Just the same old routine, her coming and going, engaging in what appeared to be normal activities. But each day, my paranoia burrowed deeper, planting roots in places I hadn't even realized were vulnerable. My instincts screamed at me, urging me not to back down, insisting I was too far gone to stop now. Then, one evening, everything changed. The footage was grainy, but there was no denying what I was seeing. Sophie and Ryan were entwined in her office, lost in each other with no regard for the world around them. My stomach twisted into knots as I watched, feeling as if I had been gutted. I couldn't tear my eyes away, even though every second felt like a fresh wound being carved into me. I had suspected it, perhaps even known it in my gut, but seeing it laid bare was an entirely different kind of agony. I called James without hesitation. When he arrived, we sat in silence, watching the footage together. He didn't offer pity or speak a word. He simply helped me sift through each frame, aiding me in cataloging the evidence. We discussed strategy, what this meant, how long it had been going on. He asked what I planned to do next, but I had no answer. All I understood was that I needed more information. This wasn't merely about one incident. I needed to grasp the full extent of their betrayal. Next, I confronted Nina. She had been avoiding me for weeks, dodging my calls and making herself scarce whenever I was around. But now I understood why, and I wasn't letting her slip away again. I caught her after work one evening, just as she was about to leave. "Nina," I said, barely keeping my composure. "I need the truth. No more excuses, no more evasions. You owe me that much." She turned to me, her face pale, her eyes darting everywhere but to mine. For a moment, I feared she would deny everything, that she'd lie straight to my face. But eventually, her shoulders sagged, and she nodded, defeated. "I didn't want you to find out this way, Thomas," she whispered. "But yes, I know about them. It's been going on for months." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt no anger, only a chilling emptiness settling into my bones. "Why didn't you say anything?" I growled, my voice barely above a whisper. Nina looked away, guilt etched across her features. Their family, Thomas. I didn't want to be the one to ruin everything. Her voice trembled, and for a moment, I thought she might break down. Please don't do anything drastic. Just think it through. Think it through. I echoed, laughter laced with bitterness. Think it through, after what they've done? She didn't reply, only turned and walked away, leaving me feeling more isolated than ever. As furious as I was, I knew I needed to keep my wits about me. I couldn't let my emotions spiral out of control. Not yet. There was still more to uncover, and I wasn't about to back down now. I continued gathering evidence, meticulously documenting everything, allowing my bitterness to simmer just beneath the surface. The final straw came one weekend during a chance encounter that sealed everything in place. While out running errands, I spotted Chloe across the street, her face pale and her eyes wide with shock. She was transfixed by something, and I followed her gaze to see Ryan and Sophie, hand in hand, laughing as if they had no cares in the world. Chloe stormed toward them, her face flushed with anger. "What the hell is this?" she shouted, her voice loud enough to turn heads nearby. Ryan stammered out a pathetic excuse, but Sophie remained silent, her expression unreadable. I watched from a distance as Chloe confronted Ryan, hurling accusations and demanding explanations. He looked like a deer caught in headlights, utterly unprepared for the confrontation. And Sophie? She stood there, indifferent, as if the whole scene was inconsequential. It felt like something out of a soap opera, yet there was nothing entertaining about it. My own anger bubbled beneath the surface, fists clenched tightly until my knuckles turned white. It took every ounce of restraint to remain where I was, to watch without intervening. But this wasn't my fight, not yet. By the time I returned home that evening, I felt as though I'd been through a war. I knew what I had to do, what was coming next. I was done pretending, done looking the other way. Sophie had revealed her true colors, and I wouldn't allow her to walk all over me without facing the consequences. With James's support, I began plotting my next moves. Knowing the truth was one thing. Allowing it to sink in was another, and now I was left staring down the barrel of betrayal, trying to figure out what to do next. I had spent days reeling from everything I discovered. The furtive glances, the hidden messages, but the shock was fading. Now it was time to act. I refused to be the sad guy quietly nursing his wounds while Sophie and Ryan sauntered around, carefree. If they wanted to play dirty, I was prepared to show them just how nasty things could get. I knew I needed to make this monumental, something they would never forget, something they would regret for the rest of their lives. I wasn't about to let them walk away unscathed. So, I did what any man in my position might do. I got to work, meticulously planning and strategizing, ensuring every detail was lined up perfectly. David was invaluable during this time. Having survived his own hell, he understood exactly what I was feeling. When I shared my plan with him, he didn't hesitate. He was right there, brainstorming ideas and fueling the fire I was stoking. Together, we spent countless hours crafting the perfect social media message. One that would hit every nerve, mock their betrayal, and expose every filthy detail we could dig up. It had to be public, humiliating, something that would stick in people's minds long after the dust settled. David had a knack for words, every line dripping with just enough venom to make people sit up and take notice. Then came the video, that damned video. I combed through the footage I'd gathered, piecing together the most damning clips that would leave no doubt in anyone's mind. I wanted the world to see the truth, to witness what I had seen. I knew it was harsh, maybe even cruel, but I was done showing mercy. They had crossed a line, and I was no longer interested in playing nice. Around this time, Chloe reached out to me. She had been distant since the confrontation with Ryan, likely grappling with her own pain. But when she finally showed up at my door, I could see the hurt in her eyes. She looked as broken as I felt. We sat down, shared a few drinks, and had a real conversation. Before all of this, I had barely known her, just the quiet girl hanging around Ryan. But now we shared something raw and painful. She sensed I knew what was happening, and I didn't hold back. I told her everything, every bitter detail. It was a relief to finally voice it all, to let someone else carry a bit of the burden I had been dragging around. Chloe listened intently, her face contorting with anger and hurt. At one point, she reached over, her hand resting on mine, lingering a moment longer than necessary. "You don't deserve this, Thomas," she whispered. There was a softness in her voice that I hadn't heard in a long time. For a fleeting moment, I wondered if this mess could blossom into something better. Maybe we could find solace in one another. But that thought quickly vanished. I had unfinished business. The night I decided to go public with everything, I couldn't find sleep. I spent hours poring over the post, refining every word until they were razor sharp. By the time I logged into the fake account I'd created, my hands trembled. My fingers hovered above the keyboard as I prepared to upload the video. Every instinct screamed at me to reconsider, to back down, but I brushed those thoughts aside. There was no turning back now. I chose my moment carefully, timing it when I knew they'd both be oblivious, likely wrapped up in their own little world. With one final, steady breath, I hit publish. The video went live, accompanied by a scathing post that called out every lie, every deceitful act. I didn't hold back. I laid everything bare, from the late-night calls to the hidden messages, including the time they'd been spotted together at the cafe. My words were sharp, angry, steeped in the hurt they had left me to bear alone. I wanted everyone to know exactly who Sophie and Ryan were. And then, I waited. The rest of the night dragged on, and I sat alone in the dark, my mind racing with thoughts of what would unfold next. I imagined Sophie's reaction when she saw it, the shock, the panic, the regret. I thought about Ryan, how he'd scramble to defend himself, probably deny everything, perhaps even attempt to turn the tables on me. But I had left no room for doubt. The proof was there for all to see. As the hours passed, my phone began to buzz incessantly. Messages flooded in, notifications lighting up my screen like a Christmas tree. Friends, acquaintances, even people I hadn't heard from in years reached out, shocked and horrified, some even congratulating me for exposing the truth. I didn't respond to most of them. I wasn't looking for sympathy or praise. All I wanted was to see them suffer as I had. Eventually, exhaustion overcame me, and I fell asleep, my mind finally quiet. But when I awoke the next morning, the fallout was already in full swing. The video had spread like wildfire, conversations buzzing everywhere, people sharing it, condemning Sophie and Ryan without mercy. I felt a twisted sense of satisfaction, knowing they were both experiencing the weight of their actions. The morning after everything went public, I woke up to a barrage of messages and missed calls. The video, the post, the entire sordid truth. It had circulated faster than I could have anticipated. Friends, family, even co-workers reached out, some offering support, others simply gawking at the spectacle. My phone buzzed relentlessly, but I left it on silent, observing as my plan unraveled in real time. I had achieved what I set out to do, and now all that remained was to watch Sophie and Ryan face the consequences. It didn't take long for the news to reach their families. The scandal hit hard. Sophie's mother was the first to call, her voice thick with anger and desperation. I couldn't answer, I just couldn't. I heard from mutual friends that her mother had broken down, crying and screaming, unable to grasp that her daughter was embroiled in something so disgraceful. She had always been proud of Sophie, holding her up as the family's golden child, and now that image lay shattered. Her family, who had once embraced me as one of their own, were left in disbelief, unsure of how to react, who to blame. I could only imagine the looks on their faces. Confusion, shame, devastation. Ryan's family didn't fare any better. They had always been fiercely protective of him, but even they couldn't ignore the evidence that had come to light. At first, Ryan tried to downplay the situation, claiming the video was taken out of context or misinterpreted. But there was no spinning this one. The truth was too stark. Soon, word got back to his employer, and that's when everything spiraled further out of control. The company couldn't afford the negative publicity, not with a scandal that was being shared and dissected by practically everyone. By the end of the week, Ryan found himself out of a job, fired. He was left scrambling, desperately calling in favors, trying to salvage whatever remained of his reputation. But the fallout didn't stop there. Friends who had once been close to both of them began to distance themselves, unwilling to be linked to what had turned into the scandal of the year. Those who had celebrated their supposed close bond, as cousins, now regarded them with disgust. Sophie faced her own share of losses. Her co-workers shunned her, whispers trailing her every move. Her family, the very people she had always relied on, were now ashamed, unable to look her in the eye. Through it all, David stood by me, at least initially. He had been fully invested during the planning stages, sharing in my anger and fueling my determination to see them pay. His own experience with betrayal made him sympathetic, or so I believed. But as the repercussions unfolded, I noticed a change in his demeanor. One day he pulled me aside, looking conflicted. "Thomas, I know I encouraged you to go through with this, but maybe we took it too far." I stared at him, disbelief washing over me. Too far? They brought this upon themselves, David. They did this to us. David shook his head, a flicker of regret passing through his eyes. "I know, but I can't help but wonder, what's left now, Thomas? You got your revenge, but was it worth all this?" He sighed, his shoulders slumping. "I'm sorry, man. I can't be a part of this anymore." He walked away, leaving me standing there, an unsettling emptiness settling in. For the first time, I found myself questioning if maybe he had a point. But that thought was fleeting. I had invested too much, endured too much to turn back now. Then there was Chloe. I knew the scandal had affected her deeply as well. She had likely been holding on to the hope that Ryan would somehow explain everything away, that this was all one big misunderstanding. But once the truth became public, there was no escaping it. She finally confronted Ryan, demanding answers, insisting he take responsibility for his actions. I heard through mutual friends that their breakup was explosive. She didn't hold back, detailing every lie and every moment he had shattered her trust. She was done with him, ready to leave him behind along with all the memories. Part of me felt relieved knowing she had liberated herself from him, but another part wondered if she was also trying to distance herself from me, from the chaos we had both endured. In the weeks that followed, Chloe moved on. I heard she started dating a guy from her workplace. She needed a fresh start, something to cleanse her from the stain Ryan had left on her life. I couldn't blame her. We had both been dragged through the mud, and perhaps distancing herself from it all was her way of finding peace. But Sophie? She couldn't escape so easily. The scandal clung to her like a shadow, her reputation in tatters. She attempted to act as if nothing had happened, as if the world hadn't witnessed her betrayal unfold in vivid detail. But no matter where she went, the whispers followed her. The sidelong glances, a constant reminder of the mess she had created. Her family, her friends, everyone looked at her with a new lens. Her own mother couldn't bear to face her, likely blaming herself for how things had turned out. She had always cherished Sophie, held her up as a model daughter, and now that pedestal had crumbled. I knew people viewed me as cruel for what I had done, that they thought I had gone too far. But when I reflected on it, all I could see was justice. They had made their choices, and I had merely exposed them for who they truly were. The days following the scandal felt surreal, as if I were wandering through a dense fog. I had finally taken the plunge and filed for divorce, a choice that brought a strange mix of relief and an unsettling emptiness. The truth was out, and I had accomplished everything I set out to do. Yet, as the dust settled, I found myself confronting a vast void. The anger and drive that had propelled me for so long were gone, leaving me feeling hollow. I had achieved my revenge, but the scars of betrayal still throbbed like fresh wounds. I knew I had to start anew, to rebuild my life. I had neglected myself in all this chaos, allowing bitterness to erode who I was. So, I made a decision. This new chapter would no longer revolve around them. It would be about me. I joined a gym, something I had always postponed, and for the first time in a long while I felt like I was doing something solely for myself. I immersed myself in workouts, channeling all the leftover anger and pain into something productive. It became a routine, a lifeline that helped me regain a sense of control. But I understood that exercising alone wouldn't heal the turmoil in my mind, so I sought out therapy with Dr. Lisa Harper. Dr. Harper was precisely what I needed: sharp, compassionate, yet unafraid to challenge me. Therapy was intense, to say the least. She urged me to confront emotions I had buried deep within, helping me peel back layers of anger and betrayal to reveal the underlying pain. Each session became a step toward reclaiming a part of myself I had thought lost forever. She taught me that forgiveness didn't mean excusing their actions. It meant liberating myself from the burden they had imposed on me. It was about letting go for my own sake, not theirs. As the weeks rolled by, I found myself more open to the idea of new relationships. Not right away, of course, but the possibility didn't seem as daunting as it once had. That's when Chloe re-entered my life. Our meeting was serendipitous, just a chance encounter, but it felt oddly comforting. She had endured her own hell, carrying similar scars. We began talking more, grabbing coffee, sharing fragments of our lives. There was an unspoken bond between us, a mutual respect for the pain we had both experienced. Over time, our friendship blossomed into something deeper, something that felt genuine and safe. It was a slow and cautious progression, which was precisely what I needed. Reintegrating into social life was another challenge. With my friends' support, I started putting myself out there, attending events and meeting new people. Even David resurfaced, reaching out after some time apart. He had distanced himself during the fallout, but when he saw me moving forward, he reconnected. We went out together occasionally, clubs, restaurants, or just to grab a drink and catch up. It wasn't quite like old times, but it was close enough, and it helped shift my focus. I was no longer the guy stuck in the past. I was making strides forward, and it felt liberating. One of the most unexpected moments came when I ran into Nina at a city event. She appeared nervous, unsure if she should approach me. Eventually, she gathered the courage and walked over. We had a long, honest conversation. She confessed that she had known about Sophie's affair but hadn't told me, fearing it would tear our family apart. I could see the regret etched in her eyes, the guilt weighing heavily on her. She asked for my forgiveness, and in that moment, I recognized that clinging to resentment would only keep me shackled to the past. I forgave her, not for her benefit, but for mine. It was time to release that burden. Ultimately, I rebuilt myself piece by piece. I learned to let go of the anger, the resentment, and the bitterness that had defined me for so long. My relationship with Chloe flourished, gradually evolving into a new kind of happiness, one untainted by my past. A few months later, we decided to leave the city behind, to start anew somewhere free from the memories that still haunted its streets, the places where everything had unraveled. Standing on the brink of this new beginning, I felt a profound sense of peace. I was leaving behind the city that had witnessed my darkest days, finally ready to move forward and let the pain recede into my past instead of my present. As I walked away, I knew I was stepping into a future filled with possibilities for trust, love, and, most importantly, for me.